Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Chairman Mike Gallagher is the man who leads the Select Committee on Engagement with the Chinese Communist Party. He's also Representative Gallagher from Wisconsin. I think you will join me, though, in saying that was a sad moment Monday night, wasn't it?
It was a sad moment, at least on two levels. One, I love Aaron and always will. And, it was exciting to see what was going to happen with the Jets. I'm obviously not a Jets fan, but you never wish an injury like that on anyone, particularly when he was looking to cap off what would been, by any stretch, a Hall of Fame, first ballot Hall of Fame career. And then, perhaps more importantly, we needed him to play 65% of his snaps in order to get the Jets' first-round pick next year, which we don't get. So
You do not get that. So, Chairman, what you do get is an opportunity to tell people about the financial war game that the Select Committee on Engagement with the Chinese Communist Party held. And I saw the clip on Twitter, now known as X, and I retweeted it, reposted it, so that people would see it, about the folks who did not want to be identified as meeting with you, which reminded me of my Harvard reunion when all the professors said, no one's taping right, we don't want this tape. Nobody wants their Chinese overlords to know what they're saying or doing with you.
It's remarkable. I'll take that in reverse order because you think about it, these are big, Wall Street leaders. They have no hesitation about flying to China, to Beijing, to Hong Kong, to meet with high-level Chinese Communist Party officials, to be photographed doing so. There's absolutely no hesitation to do that, and yet when it comes to meeting with elected representatives, bipartisan group of elected representatives, by the way, Democrats and Republicans, they are afraid of angering their limited partners, their investors in China, which I think just perfectly illustrates how much economic leverage and coercion the Chinese Communist Party has over us, particularly when it comes to the financial elite in this world. And for decades, we've been chasing returns in China at the expense of our national security. And what we discovered in our investigation, we've actually been funding our own destruction because American capital flows to Chinese military companies. On your first question,
you scored a direct hit on BlackRock. Make sure you cover that, too.
Yes. Quickly on the war game, we took the committee, about 10 of our members, equal parts Democrats and Republicans, to New York to conduct a war game that focused less on missiles and torpedoes and more on supply chains and the SWIFT banking system and sanctions to tease out the economic and financial implications of a confrontation with China over Taiwan. So we included in this war game high-level Wall Street leaders, bankers, asset managers, former general officers as well. And it was a remarkable exercise because it really hammered home the point. We analyzed a set of options in a 2028 scenario, 5 years in the future. And then we would go back in time to the present day to tease out what decisions could we make today to increase the set of options we have in 2028. Because the bottom line is we don't have many good options. If we continue on our complacent path, if we continue, fiddling around the edges when it comes to selective decoupling or reducing our dependency on China, we're going to find ourselves in a position in 2028 where they have so much economic leverage from their dominance of pharmaceutical supply chain, from their dominance of foundational semiconductors, as well as some of the high-end semiconductors, that we're really going to struggle to deter them from invading, and we're really going to struggle to use the power of our capital markets and the power of the U.S. dollar. And I'll say one final thing on that. One thing that all of the financial leaders we met with hammered home is just how important it is to preserve dollar dominance and how we take that for granted, and how the best way to do that is to actually tackle our debt, which is the mounting debt is the biggest threat to the status of the dollar, the U.S. reserve currency. So we have to be fiscally responsible as well as make the investments we need in our military in order to defuse this massive crisis.
So, Chairman Gallagher, how can you tell us how many hours it takes and how many moves were made and who ran the game and the reaction of the Wall Street people?
We only had 2 hours, which is limited. But, so a realistic war game along the lines of what they do at the Naval War College would unfold over the course of days. if not weeks, if you're talking about the sort of gold standard called the Global 14, Global 15 war game. Recognizing we're dealing with people that have busy schedules, which includes members of Congress, right? And it's very difficult to get members of Congress to sit still in any place together for 15 minutes, let alone 2 hours. We had to truncate it, but we were able to really go deep and do about 5 moves that analyzed, okay, what options do we have when it comes to trade instruments and tariffs that we could use? What options do we have when it comes to pharmaceuticals? What options do we have when it comes to critical minerals? What options do we have when it comes to sanctions and cutting off access to our capital markets and cutting off their ability to transact and things like the SWIFT system? So we did about 5 moves. We partnered with a think tank called Silverado, which did a phenomenal job leading the effort. And I think it was very useful for our members. And if nothing else, it hammered home the importance of taking action now before it's too late. It's the most obvious thing, Hugh, that you see in your personal life, but it's also true in geopolitics. If you have a risk of heart disease, if you don't wait until the actual heart attack comes, you start working out today in order to bend the curve. That's what we need to do right now. Otherwise, we're not going to have many options 5 years from now, and the Chinese Communist Party is just going to get more and more aggressive.
Did Silverado, with whom I am not acquainted, did they predict market fluctuations in the course of the crisis? Because I do think people do not understand the whole world impact of a China-U.S. confrontation.
Well, it's really interesting. In the very first move we contemplated, we had about 4 options, one of which was to cut them off the SWIFT banking system, and another one which was a very, very aggressive option. And you can almost see in terms of our outside experts, people that work on Wall Street, their eyes go wide when we started contemplating those more aggressive options, because in their opinion, imposing restrictions on U.S. investment and capital flows, cutting off Chinese exports to the United States, or denying China the access to the SWIFT system, amounted to nuclear financial weapons that would blow up the global economy. And so initially, all we got in the first 15 minutes was, "Well, you can't do that. You can't do that. You can't do that." And at one point, I said, "Well, we're here in 2028. We're the cabinet. We're the president. We're asking for options. We need options here. We can't just say, no, we can't do this. We can't do that. It'll blow up the global economy." And then we had a fascinating debate about, okay, recognizing the destructive impact of blowing up the global economy, we also have to recognize that there may be a few things worse than that, i.e. blowing up a lot of things in physical space. Put differently, if we don't find a way to deter this crisis using very aggressive economic and financial weapons, actual weapons may be used to kill thousands and thousands of Americans. So it was an intellectually very, very difficult scenario to contemplate, and which is why it was a useful exercise. And I think it forced us to think through things in a different way that we hadn't thought through before.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I am very aware that Congressman Gallagher, Chairman Gallagher, has broken the rule repeatedly. The Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunications, a.k.a. the SWIFT system. SWIFT is an acronym that the chairman did not explain. It is the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunications, and it is controlled by the West, and it links every bank with every other bank, whether through other banks, whatever. And so we have never unplugged even North Korea from SWIFT, which I can now say, having identified the acronym. You, however, owe $20 to the tip jar, Chairman Gallagher.
Oh, sorry about that. It's hard. It's hard, particularly when dealing with this, Wall Street types. It's may be worse than
we've never done a SWIFT shutdown, have we, for anybody?
Well, I think with Russia there was at least a partial cutoff of the SWIFT system, but this leads to another key point in the war game. In the wake of Vladimir Putin's second invasion of Ukraine, a lot of companies, spurred on by the government, took massive write-downs on their exposure in order to get out of Russia. And it was painful, but it was doable because Russia just isn't the same economic power that China is. With China, it would be so much more difficult for the private sector, for the financial community to do that. I mean, it just would be so much more painful, and politicians would be getting lobbied by the financial elites, by the Wall Street elites, who would be getting pressure from China in order to slow down any action we take. All the more reason why we need to move aggressively now to cut off the flow of U.S. capital to key sectors in China. All the more reason why we need to take aggressive now to get our supply chains out of China so they can't threaten to cut off the export of penicillin or life-saving drugs. These are things that need to happen before we find ourselves confronting the crisis, because our options will be limited at that point.
Representative Gallagher, in terms of Wall Street, everybody acts in their own self-interest. They always do. But there's self-interest immediate and self-interest long-term. Does the Wall Street banking community understand that long-term we cannot allow this situation to continue and indeed fester and grow worse?
Well, the morning after the war game, we held a field hearing where we had the former SEC chairman, Jay Clayton, and some other witnesses to tackle this very topic. And I do think if you look at capital flows to China, they've collapsed because people are starting to understand the systemic risks involved in investing in China. And, oh, by the way, the returns are no longer that good. I mean, compared against the S&P 500, they just haven't performed well as an investment. So we're getting there, but we're not moving fast enough. And one of the arguments we heard was, well, capital flows to China are dropping, so you don't need to put restrictions in place. And I fundamentally disagree with that. Now is the time to lock in a robust set of restrictions on capital flows to China so we're not funding our own destruction at the moment when even Wall Street seems to have conceded the point, because fewer and fewer asset managers are investing in China, and even the biggest companies like Apple, who are so exposed to China, are trying to find ways to diversify their supply chain and expand their presence in places like India. Now is the time to act.
Excellent hearing in New York this week. Go and follow the Select Committee on Engagement with China, Chinese Communist Party on Twitter. Follow Representative Gallagher at Rep. Gallagher. And I